Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me here. I'm excited to talk about one of my passions, which is the electric power utility world and this adventure that we're all in a zero carbon future. So our panel today, first I'll do a little introduction of myself and then I'll introduce the panel. So my name is Kirk Moggemer. I'm with HDR Engineering. We're a 12,000 person infrastructure company. We also serve the power utility industry on just about everything from power generation, the source, all the way to pretty much distribution, the load, and everything in between, including all the ancillary services and the strategic consulting that's really going to help us power the utility and infrastructure with these new sources and new loads. It's a very dynamic industry. It's really exciting. It's a great place to be and work because I think, as everybody knows, it seems to change every day. There's always a new priority no matter what we do. So I'd like our panelists to just go ahead and introduce yourselves and kind of give some context on your role in this conversation too, as well as where you're from and your role at your individual employer.
Sure. Thank you very much, Kirk. My name is Alan DeKessian. Hello, everybody. I work for the Port of Portland. George Seaman, my colleague, mentioned a few tidbits about the Port of Portland. Obviously, Portland International Airport, as well as general aviation airports and marine terminals and business parks. I'm a project manager in the engineering department. I really liked what Brittany, if she's still here, said earlier. She's a worker bee, not doing policy, not doing planning, just executing. And I just happen to be on the older age spectrum from Brittany, doing the same thing, executing projects.
And hello, everyone. I'm John LeCompte. I'm from Seattle City Light. I'm a member. I've done a lot of energy conservation there, but nowadays I'm in a new division there called the Electrification and Strategic Technologies Division, where our group focuses on how to encourage new technologies that decarbonize current fossil fuel emitters or carbon emitters, and a lot of that will lead toward electrifying those electrifying technologies. So what we can recommend for going that pathway, and then how is it that we can, as a utility, can modernize and provide adequate electricity to meet that need.
Good afternoon. Sean Smith, Managing Director of Chelan County Public Utility District. If you go about 2.5 hours over the Cascade straight east of here, you'll run into Chelan County along the Columbia River. We've got about 2,000 megawatts of hydro, which produces about 1,100 average megawatts. That's enough to power about 800,000 homes. We don't need all that power, so we sell to entities like Seattle and others around the state and all along the West Coast. I head up the group that a couple different groups, customer energy solutions, so I have in energy efficiency, demand response, transportation electrification, low-income programs, equity, all that. And then also I have an energy planning and trading. So all that extra power that we have around the state, my group's in charge of selling that both in short-term, next day all the way out to 20-year contracts.
Hi, everybody. My name is David Woodson. I'm the Executive Director of Campus Energy Utilities and Operations at the University of Washington. How many Husky grads do we have in the room? Yeah, okay, all right, awesome. Go Dogs. So I've been in this role for 1.5 years, or actually almost 2 years now. My main drive is to decarbonize the campus. Most of my career was actually spent up at the University of British Columbia, north of the border, doing the same stuff. And really taking a lot of the work and lessons that we learned up there and applying it to the UW campus. So, John, you and I need to talk.
All right. That's great. Thank you. I think this has been probably discussed throughout this session and the different sessions today, but to say the least, it's a fascinating time in the energy industry. We have a change in the generation mix. We're moving from fossil fuel-based generation to a lot of intermittent generation sources. In addition to that, as a baseline, and as we heard in the last presentation, we're dealing with aging infrastructure. A lot of the infrastructure out there has been out there since the 60s, reaching the end of its functional life in a lot of ways. And I mean all infrastructure, so generation to the load. In addition, we're looking at storage options. We got batteries, we got pump storage in the mix. We also have a lot of conversations about hydrogen in several different contexts. In addition, we have a need to connect all these generation resources to the grid in order to get it to the customer. That's not an easy task when you look at what we're trying to do and the amount of time that we're trying to do it in. And additionally, we have the demand side. So we also have growing electrification in general, moving from a natural gas oven to an electric range. And then obviously, that goes to electric vehicles at your home, but then it goes to electric vehicles at a fleet scale. And so we've got this wide range of changes that are happening in a very short amount of time. And so some of our questions are going to talk about that. We also have some really interesting grant funding options that are rolled out as part of IIJA and IRA. So it's a fun time. I hope you guys are interested, and then we're going to see where all these questions go. And I'm going to ask a few, and then please just raise your hand if you feel like you have an answer. And if anybody has follow-up, I'll definitely call on you. So with that, we're going to get started. So in the Northwest, we have a base load of hydropower, as Sean mentioned, especially with Chelan County PUD and their amazing generation capacity. But the addition of the intermittent renewables, decommissioning of thermal assets are going to require new approaches to maintain reliability. So what are your thoughts on the best approach to maintaining reliable power in the Northwest?
I'll take that. So for the longest time, everyone in the Pacific Northwest has just assumed we'll have enough hydro. We don't really need to worry too much about the grid. How times are going to change. So we are looking, for example, in my community, large data centers coming in, hundreds of megawatts, taking some of those. But they're building out, trying to build their own too. So, and then we have a thing called the Clean Energy Transformation Act and the Climate Commitment Act that will require us as a state to be 80% carbon free by 2030 and 100% by 2045. So the two programs that we've been involved with to maintain reliability is one called the Western Resource Adequacy Program. And so that's the entire Western US except for California. And that is basically committing to a program that you show that you have enough capacity. You have enough resources to run the grid reliably. And we've got most of the West committed to join that by 2028. So that will be a very important program to maintain reliability. The second thing that could help out the situation is the day-ahead markets. So right now we just trade mainly one entity to another called the bilateral market, and there's some real-time market called the Western EIM, Energy Imbalance Market, but we're talking a full, where most of the energy goes into what's called a day-ahead market. So then energy can move more freely around the West Coast, Western US actually. So those are the two main areas we're working on.
I'd just tag on to what Sean mentioned with emphasizing the need to think as well about the transmission and distribution capacity for the new load that's coming our way due to decarbonization, and that will be significant. So one of the things that we have to do and are doing is examining our transmission capabilities. Also, every part of our distribution grid with the overlay of where we expect and when we expect loads to hit so that we can get out ahead of building that capacity there.
Yeah, I think that's an important part. Pushing these electrons around the grid requires that infrastructure, that transmission backbone, and that's going to be one of the biggest challenges to make sure that system's up to the task. Thank you, gentlemen. So the next question I have is around speed. We talked about the amount of change and the amount of time and able to achieve the various goals that are set out for us, whether it's internally at the utility or externally from legislation. So in the Northwest, we will need to address climate adaptation, where our summers will likely have higher summer peak loads as cooling is added to buildings. I just added air conditioning to my home. We are also seeing the adoption of EVs, other factors driving electrification. Will we be able to implement the infrastructure changes fast enough? How's that for a broad question for you guys? Who wants to volunteer on that one?
Yeah, sure. I'll start because that's kind of front and center for the UW campus. I mean, so many of the buildings, for those that went to school there, that a lot of them didn't have cooling built into them. They were designed for summer temperatures that were in the low 70s, and that we could rely on that marine air to, through natural ventilation through the building to keep them cool. And that's not today's reality. Not only that, buildings where the cooling systems that are in them are not designed for these temperatures. I think last summer we set a record for the number of days over 80 degrees in September and October. Anyway, so it's a challenge already with that summer peak load. Our decarbonization strategy is really a fuel switch from natural gas to electricity. We're trying to be smart about how we use the electricity. So when we talk about using heat pumps, it's how do we optimize the COP of that heat pump such that we're getting a COP of 4 or higher. Sorry, is that too okay. Anyway,
not for me.
no, the audience, right? Being smart about how we use electricity, but recognize that that's going from a summer peak that we have today in terms of our electrical consumption to a winter peak shift that is going to take place, and that's just in the context of additional cooling that we need to keep up with now to this fuel switch of decarbonization in the wintertime, and then layered on top of that is whenever everyone else talks about EV chargers, they're talking about at home and overnight. For UW's campus, everyone's parking there during the day, and so it's a load that's being added to the peak load time of the day. All of these are massive pressures for us. We see this coming like a bright white light of a train coming right at us, and I think fundamentally it's just trying to make sure that as we tackle all of these pieces that we're being comprehensive in our approach. So we just don't just focus solely on decarbonization and electrification on that piece of it. We also take into account the fact that there's this summer load that's coming, and so what are the technologies like thermal storage, cooling storage, heating storage that we could take advantage of, and maybe there's an even sort of a smaller scale opportunity of how those resources interact with the grid that could add some efficiency.
I don't know. I'll give you a second, but I just wanted to add, I don't know if anybody read Seattle Times this morning, but there was an interesting article about thermal storage, renewable storage this morning. So if anybody gets a chance to look over the headlines in the Times, there's a pretty interesting article there. John, go ahead.
Yeah, David, you bring up some excellent points that we're considering at Seattle City Light as well. We have historically been a winter peaking utility due to heating, and that is shifting. There is an increasing occurrence of a summertime peak, and of course, everyone remembers the heat dome, and we're looking over our shoulder, waiting for the next one to come along. But that's changing the nature of our loads, and when those peaks come for us, that's particularly challenging because that also comes at a time when in the summertime where our water reservoirs are lower, and therefore it becomes a much more expensive experience for us, and that limits our economic flexibility. As well, other loads that are coming along, certainly EVs are coming. The rental car facility is in our service territory at SeaTac. Rental car facility at SeaTac is in our service territory. And they will install thousands of EV charging stations there. And so we're trying to figure out how to make that happen. And as well, the ports of Seattle and Tacoma, we are partnering with them and the Northwest Seaport Alliance. Over 4,000 heavy-duty Class 8 trucks serve those two ports daily to deliver cargo to distribution centers and warehouses and so forth. That is going to represent a whole lot of decarbonized shifting of energy. A lot of that will be electrical, I suspect. Others will be non-emitting fuels, perhaps hydrogen, perhaps liquefied hydrogen, or other electrofuels. Those will hit the grid to some degree as well. Maritime fuels, aviation fuels, and so forth, to some degree, have to be on our radar. And so we're doing the best that we can, and we're beginning to build strategies and outreach and partnerships to get our hands, get our minds around how big loads, I have to put my notes down, how big loads will be, where they will land, and when they will land, so that we can strategize appropriately and start building up the infrastructure adequately.
Alan, yeah, I was going to kind of call on
Yeah.
you, pick on you, if I may say so. But on the demand side,
Hey,
from
you're
the
just
Port
like
of
my
Portland, you have
boss.
some
Pick
thoughts.
on me. Go ahead.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on just moving fast enough, particularly
Yeah.
as you look at the utilities supplying the power, but then on the demand side where you actually need the power and are looking to move forward with some new technologies.
Right, right. So the first thing that comes to mind is when you phrase the question, can we move fast enough? Fast enough for what?
Right.
Fast enough to avoid the planet incinerating? Fast enough to lower the average global temperature by, so much? I won't address that. But the speed at which we can transition is going to have a lot of governors, a lot of things throttling us back. Financial capital, obviously, human capital, which I think Chelsea spoke to really well. Everything from the apprentice who pushes the broom to my colleague George Seaman, who manages a $2 billion very complex project with thousands, millions of stakeholders. That human capital is critical. As a project manager, a lot of what I spend my time on with these projects, whether I'm bringing a new electrical feeder to the airport or whether I'm installing EV chargers or a ground source heat pump, is procurement process or process in general. Planning, approvals, procurement. There is a lot of what we used to call red tape. Is there a new term for that? I'd be
Red
glad
tape,
to.
yeah.
Yeah. So I think one of the challenges, one of the opportunities we have is to rethink how we tackle projects from inception to completion, handoff to operations and maintenance, and to start accruing the benefits.
I think that's really insightful. And I think what I've seen is a number of utilities really trying to revision their project delivery to really gain time and making sure that they can. But even the procurement is such a fascinating part. If those of you who could probably understand through COVID, supply chain issues are affecting the power industry in a dramatic fashion right now. If you want to build a new substation, get in line and wait about a year and a half right now for transformers.
I'll just add a little bit into the what do we mean by fast, or why is fast important? And I think there's an element of demonstrating what is possible, and we definitely see a role for the University of Washington as a campus to show and demonstrate. And so the faster that we can do that, the faster others can see and follow and do, and to address the fact that the planet has kind of got some issues going on at it, right? So that's the element for us. Is that's why we need to go faster with this. And all of the issues that you brought up resonate in a big way, right? There's just the how we normally do business, and yet now we're going to take on projects over the next decade that are just on a different scale than what we've done before.
Yeah, we're definitely breaking some new territory.
I would,
Sean.
too, for this group especially, really encourage you to get in touch with your utility as quickly as you can. Sometimes if these are multiple megawatts, there's an interconnection study and there might be serious upgrades. And we're talking, something that you could get big surprises. So as soon as you know, definitely go out there. In Chelan, we're actually almost all electrified, so we're kind of a good pilot. And so people don't really, we've talked about transportation electrification, maybe you charge your car 5 hours a day. An electric water heater takes about as much energy as a level 2 charger. It's about 5 kW. If you have resistance heat in your heat pump and it drops below 30 degrees, our winter peaks twice of our normal just average day because those little wires kick on once it gets below 30 and your winter peak goes straight through the moon. And so if you're replacing all that natural gas with electricity, you'll see a lot even larger potential winter peaks.
So just to jump in really quick, because I think this is where, like, when I talk about like being smart about our electrical use. So one, we have the advantage of the campus at an urban scale. And so when we talk about heat pumps, we're talking about district scale heat pumps, and we're talking water source heat pumps, not air source heat pumps, in an effort to address that exact issue that you're talking about of getting below 30. Totally onto that, right?
Yeah, you definitely have scale at the
So one, getting a greater COP with the water-based heat pump, doing it at a district scale, so we're not having 170 different heat pumps across the campus. And this is where also I think there's elements of what we do on the campus can be insightful for what can be done instead of at a building by building scale, but at a urban scale solutions.
Great. John, did you want to finish us out on this question?
Yeah, I wanted to reinforce what Sean said about contacting your utility as soon as possible. I will add this to it. Be persistent, because we are smart people and we're trying to be smart in our business, in adapting our business processes and examining how we can facilitate new loads coming on and the examination of them. So you may go to your utility and say, hey, I've got this project or an idea for a project. It's particularly bad if you have an idea for a project because they may be only used to having projects that are well-defined where you have plans and documents already established. If you do not, and we're going through our own growing pains here, they may say, well, come back when you're ready. And that, to my mind, is too late. So be persistent. They may not be fully organized yet around how do we address and find a place for pipeline projects or prospective projects, and then how do we examine not just at a single site level, but looking at everything along that feeder and assessing, well, wait a minute, there may be other loads that are coming along. Let's go ahead and talk to these other customers on that feeder so that we don't underbuild and then get caught with inadequate capacity. So do be persistent. There may be new divisions being formed in this time, but get out there and start knocking on the door. And as well, I will reinforce the message that David brought up of getting pilot projects in place is hugely valuable. Hearkening back to my days in energy conservation when LEDs were new, I did this hotel, but before that, nobody would pick up LEDs. They were still a little bit scarred by compact fluorescence and so forth. And it was new and exotic. Finally, with our incentives, one hotel put in 5 fixtures in their porte cochere, their little drive-through area. And I sent every hotel I could contact over there to have a look. And then things started moving. So pilot projects are tremendously valuable.
Thank you, John. I'm shifting between a few different questions, but I definitely don't want to pass up an opportunity to bring up hydrogen because it is kind of an exciting topic right now. So I'm going to move to my hydrogen question. So what is your perspective on new technologies like hydrogen? We know the DOE Hydrogen Hub winners will be announced soon, and the Northwest is being watched closely as one of the potential hubs. Does the IIJA and IRA, Investment Infrastructure and Jobs Acts, provide enough incentive to move new technology forward? Are you optimistic on other new technologies?
Okay, so to the hydrogen point, so one of those large loads is hydrogen. So I don't know if everyone quite understands, most of the hydrogen, especially if it's carbon-free, is created as they need to run with their CapEx about 80% of the time, their electrolyzers. Get water, you get some carbon-free electricity, run it through your process, and boom, you have hydrogen. Now I got to store it, and then do I use it for industrial use, or do I convert it back to electricity? If I convert it back to electricity, we're talking, you'll hear anything from 17 to 40% round-trip efficiency. So I'm going to have to create a lot more electrons to recreate those electrons later. So just understand they are actually competing against other electricity loads. So my personal opinion is if you can electrify something and bypass that, you could be better off. One of the big issues coming up in the Pacific Northwest is IRS hasn't yet, but is going to rule on additionality, which is if I want $3 a kilogram tax credit, I have to build a new resource or contract for a new resource that's carbon-free, or I can sequester the carbon. As we know up here, it's mostly already built carbon-free resources, and so I could see that setting back the industry in the Pacific Northwest quite a few years. So those are something to watch out for when you're evaluating those projects. And then finally, we're looking at all sorts of things because loads rapidly increasing. We are researching gravity storage, other types of storage, generation, all of course carbon-free, and looking in our area what makes sense right now because the IRA allows now for at least 30% direct pay back to a municipality, agency, as basically a discount. So we're looking at design build transfers right now.
Thank you, Sean. David, I'm kind of curious your perspective on any of the acts potentially providing opportunities at the UW.
Well, just coming back to the hydrogen piece, because I think I got the exact same answer on the, you got to keep track of what you're actually doing with the electrons there, because before you know it, there's an efficiency major loss. But, and not to like, it just, I guess the element is what's the application of hydrogen that you're using it for? Are you using it in a form of energy storage where somehow you're producing or creating more at a time when you don't actually have the demand for it? The one thing for us, on a smaller scale, but for the University of Washington, we're using 29 megawatts of electricity 24/7, 365 days out of the year. So there's a certain element of saying, we could put a whole bunch of solar panels on our campus, and we're just going to use all of the power when it gets produced, where there's no need to actually store it because that base load is always there. So that's one piece. And the second half of the question was around like views around other technologies. Hydrogen's given as the example, but are there other things that we're sort of optimistic on? I think the element for me there is to say, well, we can't wait. So it's kind of like, the new iPhone 15 just came out, and, you can't decide, well, am I going to wait for the 18? Like, some point in time, you actually have to jump in and buy something and use it. And I think that's the same thing from a technology standpoint. And, So is nuclear fusion, that's always 10 years away? Is it finally going to come through? Maybe. I mean, there's exciting talk on that. It used to be 20 years away, so now we're at 10, so that's good. But I think having an eye towards those technologies, renewable natural gas might play a part for us in the context of, there is steam that we're always going to need for process loads in the hospital and clinical spaces. And so although we can eliminate our steam use for heating, we're probably going to still need steam for those uses. And renewable natural gas on the scale that it's available might be a good fit for that. Or maybe some type of hydrogen mix into that might be a good fit for that. So.
Yeah, I think mix is the key term here, right? There's no one solution. It's going to be multiple solutions working together.
Yeah, so it's kind of like you have your plan that you're working to, but you have an eye towards these two new technology and where they fit in.
Yeah, there's a certain amount of hedge there to what technologies are changing and being diverse in what you're working with, so you can be flexible.
All right, I'll just add one more other piece, and that's so on the campus, on the one hand, we're a tier 1 research university. It has to work, right? 24/7, 365. There's no experimentation taking place with respect to the infrastructure on our campus, but we can create a sandbox or a platform for technologies that we want to try that doesn't have a sort of a negative impact on the operation. But kind of making that sort of split, but do it intentionally and bridging sort of the research opportunities on the campus with the operations that have to work.
Yeah. Thank you. Go ahead. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I would just like to add that in analyzing new technologies, obviously risk is a big factor. And so mitigating risk becomes a major part of the effort for a project manager in executing projects either with new technologies or new applications for old technologies. Let's face it, fuel cells have been around for a long time. Putting the fuel cell on a bus or putting a fuel cell in your backyard as an emergency generator, that's a little bit different application. Specific to that ground source heat pump that George Seaman mentioned, we're using a drinking water aquifer, which to me was a tremendous risk. We cannot treat that water. We extract the water from a potable water aquifer. We run it through our process and we put it back in the ground without a drop of chlorine or any kind of corrosion inhibitor. It's a big risk. Mm-hmm. The port is willing to take that on. But to John's point about demonstration projects and being able to communicate the successes and the failures with transparency of new applications for even old technology. A heat pump's not a big deal, but maybe using drinking water for a ground source heat pump is. So I think we as infrastructure professionals just need to do as much as we can to share that information out and help others along. The other piece of that I think that we didn't really leverage as much as we could have was private sector participation to mitigate those risks. In the public sector, there's a certain amount of risk we can take. In fact, one of our guiding principles is that we take risk at the Port of Portland to engineer big change. But there's a limit to even that. And so bringing in private sector partners to mitigate that risk or manage that risk is a big opportunity to increase the speed of adoption of a lot of these new technologies or applications.
There's a lot of questions I have for you in there, but I want to move on to another question, so I apologize for not extending that thought. I want to ask a policy question. So I'm really interested as we look at this market and how it's changing and the dynamics that are at play. Are there policy changes that you would recommend or, I don't know, like to have to help facilitate the transitions that you're making in your given roles?
I guess I'll start here. So, I mentioned the Clean Energy Transformation Act and the Climate Commitment Act. And, those are very aggressive programs. They'll cost a lot of money. They could impact reliability of the electric grid. And Chelan County benefits from them. they're where our hydro is. However, the reliability of the grid is a lot more important. And we've really seen in California, they've extended the Diablo nuclear generating plant. They have once-through cooling gas plants there that they've also extended that were supposed to be offline. And they've recently permitted and installed even some gas peakers that will run 200 hours a year to account for those peaks. So the legislation does sort of allow, I believe, for us to have these pathways or delays, but I think what we really need is this flexibility where, hey, if it looks like really it's going to impact the grid, we need to have to be able to pause a little bit along the way and really keep the power flowing for places like UW, for hospitals, for for everybody out here that's doing infrastructure. When you come home at night, when you flip on the light, all you want it to do is for that light to come on. And if that stops happening, none of these policies are going to be successful.
Very well said, Sean. I think that sums things up really well, and I think it also emphasizes that changing of the generation mix with the need at the load end to have power when you need it. And I think in this day and age, and obviously after COVID, people are more reliant on their power than I think they ever were before. And when we add our vehicles to the mix, when you add school buses to the mix, if the power is not on, the kids aren't going to school, right? Or you're driving them to school, or maybe walking them because your EV didn't charge. I mean, it's simple, tongue-in-cheek, but it's quite true. As we start messing with the generation mix, we have to make sure that we can keep supply in check and make sure it's there for everybody. David?
Just once again, go back to also being smart about how we use energy. And so as it relates to policy change, big theme around, well, how do we reuse energy? Because anywhere that's a major consumer, that electricity is typically being turned into heat, or is being turned into some other form of energy that is then dumped to the atmosphere and the air through a cooling tower or out through a fan. And so the ability to identify those energy sinks and capture and reuse and share that energy. I mean that's one of the beauties that we have on the campus. Used to have the same at the airport, right? It's the ability of different types of archetypes that are there, of building types that use energy in a different way, and then how can you develop your system so that it's smart on how it shares that energy across. So in essence, we mitigate that demand that we talked about earlier about all the pressures that are coming on. Well, can we be smart about how energy gets reused and shared? Mm-hmm. So having from a policy standpoint, sorry, long way to get to, instead of having sort of a building by building specific policies, have policies that incentivize that sharing across, or a campus scale or urban scale solutions.
That's great. One more comment, and I think we can wrap it up. I think we are out of time.
Oh, are we out of time? No,
Well,
then
I
I'm
don't know. Do
done.
you have something insightful you'd like to summarize?
Well, can I just, as a grumpy old man,
Definitely continue,
share
please.
a quote? I think energy is too damn cheap. I think from a policy perspective, what we really need to drive efficiency is full and fair pricing for the commodity that we're consuming. And whether that's getting rid of declining block rates or starting to fairly price in externalities to the energy that we consume, I think we'll see a huge shift in behavior when energy as a commodity is fully and fairly priced.
I think
Well,
that's
there's a
really
reason
good.
why all those data centers are coming into Chelan, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Sean's going to remain silent on that.
And the other part is, did you see what the prices are in the latest CCA auction? Those real prices are starting to come to bear, at least on the natural gas side.
Oh, sorry. I will say, Alan, you might get some more comments from the crowd on that point, but I think it'll be a good conversation to have. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate you having us here.